Hello, everyone. This is the recording tape of uh, the lesson for February 11. As you are watching now, uh, one of my teaching assistant will be in the room checking your participation and of course attendance. And I will also jump into the room. You probably see me or you don't probably see me, but well, if you see me in the room, that means I'm not on my way going somewhere. But yes, the teaching assistant will always be in the room, but I would just if you don't see me now, I will come back later in the room and then perhaps if you have any questions, you can ask me. So today lecture is about history and also we will go back a little bit to business and of course the thing we study together before economics. So we put all together just like that. Now this is the first part of the lecture today. And of course, when we talk about the lecture, you are going to listen to a lecture. It's actual lecture. It's a real lecture from Cambridge University. Today we'll begin the lessons with that. I will try to speak slowly, and if you have any questions, if you do not understand any part during this lecture, please note that down. And when you see me back into the room in any moment from now, you can just ask me questions, okay? So let's put it that way. Now, first of all, let me share with you my slide for today. Sharing now, okay. Right, everyone, let me share this. Well, as I said to you that we are going to talk about history today. Well, put it that way, we said put history, but it's also about science. I'm not sure because that's going to be one of the questions when we talk about history and science together, okay? So when we put history and science together, my very first question to start the class today is to ask all of you if you know any famous scientist of the world. Of course, I'm not particularly, paying attention to scientists in this country in Thailand, but I would like you to focus on uh, the scientists in the history that all of you know. Now, when I say history, I hope that you understand what I'm talking about over here when we say history, because this is what, when I read history, this is what it is, history, okay? History. We said history. We don't say history, we say history. That's how we do it. All right. So, and as I said, we are going to talk about history plus science, but I don't know which is going to be focused in the lecture. I'm asking you to listen to or to watch. This is the video I'm going to ask you to watch later on about this. Okay. So let me just clear this. Right. If I ask you to think about scientists of the world, of course, you come with lots of idea, of the scientists in the world. And a lot of famous people came to your mind. Maybe uh, one of the persons, one of the people, one of the scientists, the famous scientists of the world that might come into your mind right now is this person. And I think you know him. This is Isaac Newton. You know that. I don't know if you still remember what you read about Isaac Newton, or you probably are very interested in science anyway, or you are probably scientist yourself. But you know that this person is actually the figure of the scientific revolution back in 17th century. He is, or he was, let's say he was, I have to say that he died, okay? So he was um, English scientist born in Midland of England long time ago. But what makes the world know this person is because when we talk about Sir Isaac Newton, you know that he is not only a physicist, but he is also a mathematician. And you know, he was famous. He is famous for, actually, we remember him that way, that he is famous for his what is that? His law of nature or law of motions, and then also the law of universal gravitation. That all we know him. Okay, and that's the first person you that probably came to your mind right now is Sir Isaac Newton. You also know this person. Sorry, you hear something. Hang on just a second. Hang on just a second. I turned something on. I need to just, okay, I stopped that video. Now, if you take a look at that, you know, this is, this, what we talk, Louis Pasteur. Okay, it's the name could not come into my mind readily. But this is Louis Pasteur. Of course, you know him. This one, of course, you know, he was from France, but he died in 1895. Now, you know, this French chemist and microbiologist because he's the person who had these great contributions to science, technology, and medicine, of course. And we cannot pass these lessons without mentioning this person of all, because he is the person who discovered microorganisms that cause fermentation and disease. And he was the person who said that diseases are everywhere. And people back then did not believe him, of course. You know this. That is Louis Pasteur. Okay? We call Louis. Without Louis, it's not good. Louis, that's the French word. So we say Louis Pasteur. The next person I'm going to show you, and I'm sure you know this man. And this one, I think, come from Italy, right? And this, his name is Galileo Galilei. Now, everybody knows him because he is Italian philosopher, astronomer, and of course, mathematician, this person. And now Galileo is the person who confirmed the law of motion and of course, the strength of materials, right? We know him. And we know the law of falling bodies and parabolic trajectories marked in the beginning of the fundamental change in the study of motion. We know this person. But today's lectures are not about scientists who are male. These are all male scientists. But today's lectures from Dr. What's her name? Dr. Patricia Farah is going to be about scientists who were women in the past. Okay, so let me mention one name, and I'm sure you know this person so well. You know her. I give you time to think if you know this person. This is Marie Curie, right? She is a Polish-born French physicist. And why she was very famous, and she is famous until now, is because she received 2 Nobel Prizes. And she was the person who discovered radioactivity that we use to stop the growth of cancer cells. Until nowadays, you know that she contributed a lot to medicines and of course in science in general. And she received she's the winner for Nobel Prize for Chemistry, right? 2 times back in 1911, we know that. And of course, today we are talking about something like her, you know, someone like her, I mean, Marie Curie. And Marie Curie is a female scientist, and we are talking about female scientists, but I'm not talking about that. Dr. Farah, Dr. Patricia Farah will discuss that. So I'm gonna refer to you to the textbook in Lecture Skills B on page 66 to take a look at the fact files of the people Dr. Farah will be telling you about. So if you go to page 66, 66 now, you see the fact files of 3 important scientists. Of course, they might not be as famous as the people I showed you now, because these are the world famous scientists and we all know them. But why are we talking about these three women uh, scientists on page 66 is because they have some connection with Cambridge. And that's why I would like you to take a look at. So go to page 66 right now, and then you see these fact files. Okay. Now I'm not going to ask you uh, the questions in 1.1 on page 66, but what I would like you to take a look at, and I'm going to read that with you, is the fact files of the three people. Over here, the first person, her name is Caroline Herschel from 1750 to 1848. And of course, she was a British astronomer who worked together with her brother Wilhelm and recorded astronomical observations and made complicated calculations of distances between planets. And of course, with Mary Somerville, she became first female member of the Royal Astronomical Society in 1835. Think about the history where only male scientists were accepted in the group of such a society, such a group of scientists, but female uh, scientists or female people were rejected, you know, long time ago. So just ignore the blank space there, because actually that's for number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 from 1.1, but I did not ask you about that. Now, more attention I want you to take a look at is you look at the person number 2, and her name is Mary Somerville from 1780 to 1872. She was a Scottish scientist who taught herself mathematics and astronomy. How wonderful. She was, brilliant to be able to teach herself, such a hard subject or difficult subject like mathematics and astronomy. All of you know that. And of course, she published papers and books on science in 19th century. And with Caroline Herschel, the person above her, she became first female member of the Royal Astronomical Society in 1835. Same thing with similar to Caroline Herschel. Both of them became the first female members of the Royal Astronomical Society in 1835, the same year. Now, the last person, if you looked at the screen right now and also your book on page 66, you see this last person called Herta Artin. Now, Herta Artin from 1854 to 1923, and she was a British physicist, engineer, and inventor who studied at Girton College, Cambridge. Now, just to give you information, Girton College in Cambridge was the first college that accepted women to study. Okay, and in 1902, 1902, she published the electric arc, which that showed how to make electric arcs used for lighting and lighting for a more efficient. And then she also was the first woman to read her own paper in front of the Royal Society of London. And just to tell you a little bit about the background of Royal Society of London, only male scientists or male knowledgeable persons were accepted to be able to read something in the Royal Society of London, which is one of the institute for knowledgeable people. But remember, Herta Artin back then was the first woman who was able to read her paper in front of everyone in the Royal Society of London. So three of them were very important person. I will use the present tense over here, but of course all of them died. So let's take a look at that. Now remember, in Dr. Farah, I am going to ask you to look at her lecture and only two people out of these three people, Caroline Herschel, Mary Somerville, and Hertha Arndt, only two people would be discussed. And actually, number three is in uh, another clip, but I did not show you that clip. My focus today is only the two people I'm going to ask you to do. But before you listen to that, actually, let's take a look at the book on page 67. So we look at the key vocabulary together. We call vocabulary in the context. You will be hearing from the lectures of Dr. Farah later. Let's take a look at 2.1 on page 67, and you will see these on the textbook right now. Now, there are words, everyone. I would like you to just separate these 6 words, and each item from number 1 to number 6 contain one highlighted words. So you have altogether 6 words. In number 1, you have the word discrimination, which is a noun. In number 2, you have the word attitudes, which is also a noun. In number 3, you have this noun phrase called feminist movement, which is a noun, or simply call it a noun phrase, just put that as a noun first at the moment. And number 4, and you have an adverb ideologically, okay, in number 4. And number 5, you have also a noun called opposition. In number 6, you have heroines, which is a noun also, okay? So all of these words, I'm gonna give you more detail later of these words, but first of all, you have to think about how to separate the words to A or B. A, if you see these 6 words, about the history of women's rights, then you put A after each item from number 1 to number 6. If you see B words about what people believe or think, it's what people believe or think, then you put B after item number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. Okay? Tick tock, tick tock, tick tock. Since this is not a live class, what I can do is just to go with you what happened right after this. So let's take a look at that. Now I'm just giving you the answer. All right, here we go. Right. Now, first of all, if you take a look at words, words. Here, oh, what happened? Oh, now I got it. A, words associated with the history of women's rights. This is words about the history of women's rights. So think about it. And then B, words associated with what people think or believe. All right. Now I think we can go on with that, right? Okay. Oops. Hang on. I get stuck with what I was writing here. Oh, I deleted it. All right. Okay, my mark. So pay attention to that. Put word number 1. There certainly was discrimination against women in the past. This word is B. This is what people believe or think. When you talk about discrimination, to discriminate is to separate people into groups. But if you discriminate against people, in this context, in number 1, there was discrimination against women. That means you stopped women from taking part or having the right to do something. You know what I mean? You discriminate women against something. You don't want women to do that particular thing. So here, discrimination against women mean you just don't want women to do the things that you think only male people can do, okay, in certain job, like to be scientists, for example. In the past, discrimination against women happened or occurred because they believe that women should not do as men do. in the past. So this is again, so women could not do that. Discrimination to separate you away from something you want to do. Put it that way. Okay, so this is all about it in B. All right, so let me clear that. Now, number two, I am going to be looking at some women in the past and how the past has affected attitudes towards women today. Read slowly. I'm going to be looking at some women in the past and how the past has affected attitudes toward women today. Attitude. What do we mean by that? This is again B. This is what people believe or think. Your attitudes, it's what you think, what you believe. This is what your attitude mean. Tasana khati in Thai. That's what we have. Okay. Okay. So attitudes. This is what you think or you believe. If you have attitude towards that particular thing, you have a certain belief on that particular thing, and it seems to be difficult to change anyway if you have attitudes towards something. All right. So let's just listen. Attitude towards. Normally we say that attitude towards women. Okay. So it's a B. So let's take that attitude. All right, so again, we have B and B. Next, number three, I think roughly since about the 1960s and 70s, the rise of the feminist movement, there's been two major approaches toward thinking about women in history of science. Well, this is what Dr. Farah will say, or is going to say, or tell you in her lecture. So we copy that down. Let's say this is about 1960 and 70, the rise of feminist movement. There have been two major approaches toward thinking about women in history of science. Now, when we talk about movement, we talk about motion, but movement linked with political activities. When you have certain movement, you do something in order to cause some changes in society. Okay, so if you have the rise of the feminist movement, that means you have the kind of activities or what you are going to do by, in order to help feminine people to be able to do something just like male in the past. So feminist movement is just like that. Okay, so this is what we talk about the feminist movement. One of the things that you can take a look at, there's been two major approaches toward. So, we can call that a certain kind of approach. And a certain kind of approach means the movement done by feminists or people thinking that women should be able to have the right just like male friends or people. Okay. And what is this thing is number three should be A, because we talk about women's right here. Okay, it's focused on the women's right. If you have certain movement, you want to encourage the rights for the women in history. So yes, this is number three. Number four, and for me, that's a very ideologically sound statement, and it's what I like to believe our current state of science is. This is again from the talk of Dr. Farah. Later on, you see that in the lecture, a very ideologically sound statement. Something ideologically sound statement. Look at the word statement. Statement is what people said. Sound mean it's not about what you hear. When we talk about sound here is an adjective, and it means reasonable. Okay, or logical, put it that way, sound statement. But ideologically, if you put that thing under before sound statement, you feel that the sound statement there should be something that all people should accept ideologically. Ideology means all people accept and all people agree that that statement should be there. So that's ideologically mean. Okay, ideology. Now in Thai, you always say ideology, something like that. right? But this is ideologically the at work. Okay, so that what is it ideologically? This is what people believe or think. Again, it should be B. Now in number 5, look at number 5. In number 5, you have, unsurprisingly, when centuries of traditions were overthrown and women first came to Cambridge, there was a considerable opposition. Opposed, opposite, mean in opposite directions, something that is not on your direction, something which is against you, something which is opposite to you. You understand the word opposite anyway. If something is opposite, and if you say black, one people say white, that would be opposite. Okay, you say fat, people say small, that would be opposite words. So opposition is just like that. But considerable oppositions over here, when you have something, you know, in the opposite sides, that means something that you do not agree with, and you want to oppose, you want to reject that, you want to say no to that. So oppositions mean no, we don't want that, something like that happened. So there was considerable oppositions, mean people stop the idea of, you know, breaking the traditions to bring women into college, because in England, back then in 16th, 17th century, 18th century, even, sorry, 17th century, women were not allowed to go to college, just like male. It's happened before in history. So yes, when people oppose to that, people reject it, people do not agree with the idea of taking women into the college. So considerable oppositions mean ไม่เห็นด้วยเป็นอย่างยิ่งอะไรเงี้ยครับ คือมีการต่อต้าน what we call that. All right. Number 6, the second, what is number 5, A or B? Number 5 should be, because this thing should be B, because again, this is what people think. When you oppose something, you think this is not right and you want to go against it. Now, number 6, the second is to try and resurrect individual women as hidden heroines who's been concealed in history. If you look at this word, you feel like heroines, oh, this is illegal drugs that can make people drive if it is overdosed or what. Yet it sounds the same, except that that heroin is spelled this way. It's pronounced the same. This is like an illegal drug. Police can put you in jail if you take it. And if you overdose that, you could die. Yes, of course, this is drug, right? Some kind of illegal drug, bad drug. Let's say heroin. But this is also heroin with an E. When you take a look at heroin, heroin is the opposite word of hero. It's an opposite, no, you know, we can still say that it's opposite words. It's because even though they means the same thing, one word hero always refer to men, while heroines are also hero, but they usually refer to women. So we call this heroine as opposed to heroes. Okay, so we read heroine same as drug, like this one, but we're talking about women heroes. Okay, so we say heroines. Okay, so what's word about this? This word should be A, right? And I think this word should be A. That's what we think. All right, let me clear all this. Let me clear all this. Now we cleared. One particular things I would like to take a look at is when you have B here, yeah, is it correct enough? Now when we put that thing on B, and then, oh no, why we put A and B and D over, I go back first, sorry. Now, if you look at the, I cannot go back now, sorry. I'm going back to the meanings of these words now, as I told you before. So if you go back to the textbook right now in 2.2, match the words in bold, I mean the words discrimination, attitudes, movement, a feminist movement, ideologically, opposition, heroines, all of these words. Match the words in bold in the sentences in 2.1 to the following definition. You have definition A, B, C, D, E, and F. Okay, let's take a look at number 1. Number 1 should be B. When you take a look at discrimination, what discrimination means? Discrimination means treating a person or a group of people in a worse way than other people. Yeah, you think that you are better than someone else, so you discriminate them. That means you try to separate them away from what they want to be because you have such a belief that they are not good enough or they should not do as you do. So discrimination is B. Now, in number 2, that should be D matched into point 2. That meaning of attitude is the feelings or opinions about something or someone. That is D. Okay, so feelings or opinions about something or someone is what we call attitudes in academic English. Now, feminist movement should be F. A group of people who believe women should have the same rights and opportunities as men. We call feminist movement. So here we refer to a group of people who have such belief that women should have equal rights to men. Number 4 should be C. How someone thinks as a result of their ideas or beliefs. Okay, this is what how someone think. Ideologically mean how someone, this is how someone think as a result of their ideas or belief. If this is something good, they believe it's good, they think it's good. So ideologically, it's that. Now in number 5, that should be definition. Oh, why is this? I have to go back, sorry. In number 5, what's number 5? Why I jump into number 6 first and then come back to number 5, okay? The meaning of heroines is E. A woman who is admired for having achieved something important. So as I said, this is a hero in the form of female. And what is the last that we have? So the last things we have for opposition would be A. I think I forgot that. A. Oppositions mean strong disagreement with another person's idea or opinion. So yeah, strong disagreement. It's all about disagreement. So yes, I think try to think of these words that you hear: discrimination, attitudes, feminist movement, ideologically, opposition, and heroines. You are going to hear in the lecture by Dr. Patricia Farah. And one of the important questions that I would like you to focus on is, of course, only 2 women will be discussed. And I can tell you now without having you to guess, because this is easy things that I can tell you now. She will be talking about 2 people. And of course, we are not going to listen to people number 3. The first person she's going to talk about is Herta Arthun. Okay, so Herta Arthun is the person she will be talking about first. I would like you to listen to her lectures, and then I want you to just copy this page, write down the question. The first question you should ask for Herta Arthun part is why history is important. She will mention that. I want you to focus on that and take note on why history is important. Of course, she will be talking in British English, and it will be difficult for you to understand that anyway, but I want you to try to note down as much information as you can. And then in number 2, extra information of Herta Arthun. I want you to listen to, okay? Extra information of Herta Arthun. Just write down extra information. What about her? Her study, her work, whatever is mentioned in the lecture. That is number 1 you are going to look at. Please note down these 2 questions. And then the second person she will be talking about in her lecture is Mary Somerville. And for her, Mary Somerville, 2 main points I want you to focus. Point number 1 is extra information of Mary Somerville first. I want you to take a look at. And the second thing is the main aim of Dr. Farah's lecture. What is her main aim? What is her main objective? Okay, just write those down. So remember, for Herten, you have to take a look at why history is important and extra information of Herten herself in the lecture. And for the second person, Mary Somerville, you are going to take note on the extra information of Mary Somerville. What about her life, her study, her work, everything. And then the main objective of Dr. Farah's lecture. Just listens and put that down. And the person she did not discuss is the first person on your fact file, Caroline Herschels. We skip that one, okay? So just listen to two people over here. Again, I mentioned, please note down as much information as you can. I'm going to play the lectures right now, which is the video clip, okay? Let me just erase that. Just pay attention because this thing is very important, everyone. With this. Where is her lecture? Oh, okay. Hang on just a second. I think this, no. Oh, sorry. Oh, why do I go to line now? Sorry. Oh. I think this one here, okay. All right, here, this is the lecture. Okay, let me share you her lectures now. Oh, all right. Hang on, we need battery immediately before I run out of the battery. Okay, here we go. Okay, we got it. All right, now I'm gonna play that with you now. Let me share. You see that on, right? Okay, I think you see that on now. The first part of the video is the listening for gist and detail, which is on page 67. You have to note down the things I gave you. Do not pay attention at all to what is written on page 67 now, but just pay attention to 4 important questions, 2 of which for each person she will be discussing in her lecture. And her lecture of Dr. Patricia Farah is about women and history of science, okay? Just listen. This is going to take you about 6 to 7 minutes for the first part.
This lecture is Women and the History of Science. So it's going to be not only about how we see women, but also about different ways in which we can think about history itself and how we write history and tell stories about the past. And I'm going to start with my favorite quotation, I think, of all time. It's by a woman called Hertha Ayrton, who was a physicist at the end of the 19th, early 20th century. And she wrote, "I do not agree with sex being brought into science at all. The idea of woman and science is completely irrelevant. Either a woman is a good scientist or she is not." And for me, that's a very ideologically sound statement, and it's what I'd like to believe our current state of science is. I'm not at all sure, I'm not at all convinced that that actually is true now, but I'm not going to be analysing the current state of science. I'm going to be looking at some women in the past and how the past has affected attitudes towards women today. Because for me, that's one of the main points of doing history. Of course, I'm interested in what did happen and sort of writing little stories about the past and doing detective hunts in the archives. But for me, the whole point of doing history is to understand more fully how we've arrived at our present situation and hopefully be able to do something in order to improve the future. So that's my sort of motivation for looking at women in the history of science. There certainly was discrimination against women in the past, whether there is or not now. And Hertha Ayrton herself is a good example. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about that, not just to do a biography of Hertha Ayrton, but to pick out some of the key features of her life that illustrate attitudes towards women in the past. And this is a picture of the chemistry laboratory at Girton. Girton was the first women's only college at Cambridge, and it was founded in 1869, and Hertha Ayrton came here a few years later in 1876. But at that time, women still couldn't go to the laboratories of the major laboratories at the Cavendish belonging to Cambridge University. So the women's colleges had separate laboratories for the women. And Hertha Ayrton probably studied in this laboratory. Unsurprisingly, when centuries of tradition were overthrown, women first came to Cambridge, there was considerable opposition. And this is a rather satirical poem from Punch, the comic journal, very famous in the 19th century. The woman of the future, she'll be deeply read, that's certain, with all the education gained at Newnham or at Girton. Newnham and Girton were the two women's colleges at Cambridge. She'll puzzle men in algebra with horrible quadratics, dynamics and the mysteries of higher mathematics. So that's a rhyme which is of course mocking the pretensions of women who want to learn subjects like mathematics and physics. I think it's also expressing a certain amount of fear and trepidation on the part of the men. I mean, it is quite true that some of the women were considerably better than men at maths, and this was a source of consternation to some of the men. But it articulates a belief that was prevalent then, and I think to some extent still is now. You can either be a normal woman, or you can be a good scientist, but you can't possibly be both. And I'm going to go on and tell you a bit more about Hertha Ayrton. So she got a certificate of mathematics at Cambridge. Because she was a woman, she wasn't allowed to graduate. And in fact, women couldn't graduate from Cambridge University till 1949. They couldn't officially get their bit of paper. And there's a picture on the right of her most famous book, The Electric Arc, which had very practical application. It was to stop street lights from stuttering at night. And in 1902, she was proposed for fellowship of the Royal Society, which was the year the book, The Electric Arc, was published. But although she was proposed for fellowship, she was turned down on the grounds which might seem rather extraordinary now, that she was married. But in fact, this time, neither teachers nor civil servants, if they were women, were allowed to be married. So this is the reason for her rejection from the Royal Society. At least she was allowed to read her own paper at the Royal Society. She was the first woman that was able to do that. And so I'm going to go back and talk a bit now about Mary Somerville, in a way Hertha Ayrton's predecessor, although she didn't go to university. She couldn't go to university. And in 1826, she published a paper in the Philosophical Transactions, which is the official academic journal of the Royal Society. And the picture on the right there is a marble bust of Mary Somerville that was put in the foyer of the Royal Society. I always think it's rather a backhanded tribute because she was never allowed in the Royal Society. And when her paper was presented, her husband, who was a doctor, had to read it out for her, even though he knew very little about it. So in the course of this lecture, my basic question is going to be, how have women been perceived by historians of science? And until a few decades ago, they were largely ignored by historians of science. And since then, I think, roughly since about the 1960s and 70s, the rise of the feminist movement, there have been two major approaches towards thinking about women in the history of science. The first is to emphasize how much they were discriminated against. The second is to try and resurrect individual women as hidden heroines who've been concealed in history. And the third version is the one that I would like to put forward, which I've called here de-romanticizing the past. In this lecture, I'm going to talk about each of these in turn.
Right, and I think that is the whole lecture. I hope you follow so much what they talked about over here. Let me just go back to what we had here. This is why history is important, right? In the first the first moment. Now, in Hertha Ayrton, everyone if you listens to her very carefully, you know what's going on over here. So let me just go back to that one. No. Here we go. Now we go back to what the lecture is all about. I hope you jotted down something already on the paper, and I'm going to tell you what happened in the lectures. First of all, why history is important. This is Dr. Patricia Farah talked about why history is so important. This is what she talked about, everyone. Here we go. Now, she talked about the history that helps us understand the present and perhaps improve things in the future. That's what she discussed. If you noted this part down, even 50% or 60%, 70% of that, hopefully 50% at least, you understand and you could listen to the lecture so well. So yes, you were able to detect something from the lecture, which is the good skills for graduate student right now. Why history is important, because this is real academic English she was using in her lecture. Yeah, why history is so important. Please note down, it helps us understand the present and perhaps to improve the future. If you note down only this part, you are okay with that. You get about 50%. Or note down of this part, this is another 50%. That would be great. Okay. Now, extra information about Hertha Artens that you should note down now include went to Girton College, the first women college of Cambridge back in 1876. Sorry, that's my dog. Shh. All right, and that's natural thing. We do not cut anything right over here. I'm in the room with my dog. Now, extra information. Part number one is went to Girton College back in 1876 and then got a certificate in math, but wasn't allowed to graduate. Remember, she got a certificate in math, but she could not be a graduate of Cambridge, which was very funny back then, that women did not have the right at all, right? She got a certificate in mathematics, but was not allowed to graduate. That is the second point you should note on. And the third point, this is one of the point. Okay, this is number two. Number three, you should note on would be her book helped solve a problem with street lamps. This is very important because people talked about street lamps, and this person, Herta Arten, was the person, you know, from her book, the idea of street lamps came from. All right. And proposed for fellow, her name was proposed for fellowship at the Royal Society, but turned down. The word turned down means said no to, rejected, because she was married. That's the only reason. She was married. She could not get any fellowship at the Royal Society of London, which was again funny. Okay. And the last part you should talk about, which is part number 5, you should talk about, is she was the first woman to read her own paper at the Royal Society of London, at least. All right. She read her paper at the Royal Society of London. So we take a look at that. All right. So 1, 2, 3, 4. Please check your answer. Okay. You can always come back to look at these slides after. Now, the second person she talked about in her lecture is Mary Somerville. And of course, extra information of Mary Somerville you should be noting down is, number 1, did not go to university because she couldn't go. What the simple reasons for her not going to university was because she could not go. Put it that way, she was not allowed to go because she was a woman. Next thing is she published paper in Royal Society Journal in 1826. That is another part you should note down. If you have one of these, you're good. Or you can have never allowed to go into Royal Society, so her husband read her paper instead, because she was not allowed to go inside the Royal Society. Okay. Take a look at that. And then, of course, main objective of Dr. Farah in her lecture is to examine the way that his historians have viewed women's role in science. That's another word, you know. Right. I said this thing before, and I pronounce it as history. History. You do not hear this part at all, but this one is historian because you focus on the second part, historian. Okay, historian mean นักประวัติศาสตร์ history mean ประวัติศาสตร์ so all in all, when you look at her lectures, it comes into the conclusion that her lecture is about history or science. What do you think? History or science? It looks just like everything is focused on science, but actually she focused on history, especially the starting or the beginning of the movement, the feminist movement back then, you know, starting with scientists, but actually it spread to many areas or many professions right after that. So this is all about history we talked about. Okay. Well, I would be glad if you could at least get one piece out of 3 pieces of extra information of Mary Somerville, or 1 out of 4 or 5 of Arthur, right? Okay, so here we go. The next part I'm going to talk about, and these will be very important to your presentations later, is the next part. I want you to focus on the next part very quickly, and this next part is on page 68 of the textbook. If you go to 68 on the page, on the textbook number 4 called signposting language in lecture. Even though we talk about the signpost in the lecture, but these signposts should be adopted and used in your presentation. And we are going to listen to some extracts from Dr. Farah lectures, what she talked about. And I want you to just fill up the blank spaces of extract 1, extract 2, 3, 4, and 5 in 4.1. Okay, what is the focus? You hear everything except the part that should be filled up on the blank spaces. Okay, so we go back to, let me stop sharing these things now, and we go back to the second part of the video. Okay, so we go back to the second part of the video. Now, let me share. Oh, how do I share with you? Okay, the second part, you see the black screen right now, right? Okay, we start with this. So listen to extract 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and fill up the information on blank spaces. There it comes.
B2. Extract 1.
This lecture is Women and the History of Science. So it's going to be not only about how we see women, but also about different ways in which we can think about history itself and how we write history and tell stories about the past.
Extract 2.
But I'm not going to be analysing the current state of science. I'm going to be looking at some women in the past and how the past has affected attitudes towards women today.
Extract 3.
And so I'm going to go back and talk a bit now about Mary Somerville, her, in a way, Hertha Ayrton's predecessor, although she didn't go to university. She couldn't go to university.
Extract 4.
So in the course of this lecture, my basic question is going to be, how have women been perceived by historians of science?
Extract 5.
In this lecture, I'm going to talk about each of these in turn.
B3.
All right, we stop right now. So you hear extract 1 and extract 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, so let me go back to what we hear before. Sorry, is that part?
Major approaches.
Okay, just listen again, and I will stop from time to time.
B2. Extract 1.
This lecture is Women and the History of Science. So it's going to be not only about how we see women, but also about different ways in which we can think about history itself and how we write history and tell stories about the past.
That is right. That is extract 1. So you hear this lecture is women and the history of science. So it's not going. It's. You hear that it's. What you should focus on now, and you should put on for extract number 1 is it's going to be. It's going to be, right? It's going to be. You have it is there now. It is going to be. So next part.
Extract 2.
But I'm not going to be analysing the current state of science. I'm going to be looking at some women in the past and how the past has affected attitudes towards women today.
What we hear from now, it's in number 2. Again, she said, but I am not. And then what you should put down that I am not going to be. She said again, going to be. Analyzing the current state of science. She was pretty clear about not the state of science. And then she said, I am. She said, I am. She just said, I'm going to be. That is the part that you should put in extract number 2. So again, she said, going to be. In her lecture, she said, going to be looking at some women in the past and how the past has affected attitude toward women today. So next part, extract number 3.
Extract 3. And so I'm going to go back and talk a bit now about Mary Somerville. Her, in a way, Hertha Ayrton's predecessor, although she didn't go to university. She couldn't go to university.
So in extract number 3, again, she said, and I am, it's I am. So I'm going to back, right? So she said something like going to again. Going to, this time no be, so say going to back. Back is the verb over here. Back means to support, all right? Back and talk a bit about Mary Somerville. Her, in a way, Hertha Arden's predecessors, although she didn't go to university and she couldn't go to university. That's what she said. So this is extract number 4.
Extract 4.
So in the course of this lecture, my basic question is going to be, how have women been perceived by historians of science?
Now, this time again, she said, so in the course of this lecture, my basic question is going to be. Again, this time you have to put because you don't have verb there. So you can say is going to, right? It's going to be, it's going to be. So she said something like, so in the course of this lecture, my basic question is going to be, how have women been perceived by historians of science? Right. How did historians of science look at women back then? That's what it meant. So the last extract.
Extract 5.
In this lecture, I'm going to talk about each of these in turn.
So again, she said, in this lecture, I'm going to talk about. So you have to put or, so you have to put going because you have, she said, I'm is there, going to talk about, right? Each of these things, all right? Now you see, if you take a look at these things, the signposting language for this one is everything start with to be, to be, to be. Okay, everything start with to be. This one you have, but you did not put that thing is, she said it is, right? It is going to be. In number 2, she said, I'm not going to. And then again, in number 2, she said, I am going to. In front of this, I'm going to. And in number 3, she said, I'm going to. And then number 4, she said, it is, my basic question is going to be, you have is, okay? Verb to be, it's there. And then number 5, you have, I'm going to be again. Right. Everything starts with be, going, to. Sometimes you have a verb, like a base verb. And sometimes you have verb ing. For example, when she say, I am going to be analyzing the current state, or I'm not going to be analyzing the current state of science. I'm going to looking at some women, something like that. This is verb ing. You see that. This is present participle right after that, right? It's going to sorry, if you, I forgot something. If you put to verb ing, you have to put be, sorry, before that, and or verb. So when you say, I'm going to with verb ing, you would say, I'm going to be analyzing, or I'm going to be looking at, something like that. Or you just use the base verb, I'm going to look at, I'm going to analyze, okay? Whatever, you can say all of these things. So you can capture this screen right now if you want. But you can always come back and take a look at my lectures over here because this is posted on YouTube anyway. So let me clear this thing. Let us go back before we stopped all of this. So let me stop sharing first and we go back to where we're supposed to be now. Yep, okay. So in this part here, in order is extract of signposting language. The word is signposting language. Why do we need these things, everyone? Signposting is very important, and we can answer these questions over here. When you look at the signposting, answer the questions about the extracts in 4.1. in number 1, does Dr. Farah use these verbs? Let me say these verbs. Like what? Like it's going to be not only about, I am not going to be analyzing. I am going to be looking at some women in the past. I'm going to be back and talk a bit now about. And then my basic question is going to be blah, blah, blah. All right. So all of these, we have number 5. In this lecture, I'm going to talk about. Now, all of these side postings, if you answer questions in 4.2 on page 68 of the textbook right now, does Dr. Farah use these verb phrases? These the verb phrases you look at. Okay, these verb phrases to tell us what is coming in the lecture, or she used them to summarize what she has said. Now the questions to that, and maybe that answer come to your minds, some of the students' mind already now, that in 4.2, these signposting language, we call them as the marker to talk about, to mention what is going to be talked about in the lecture. So you should say, Dr. Sarah or Farah uses these verb phrases to tell us what is coming in the lecture. When you do the presentation in academic presentation, signposting language is very important because it's just a sign, it's just a signal for you to tell your audience what's going to be next in your presentation. Every time when I tell you I would something, I would say, next, I'm going to talk about. Next, let me talk about. Next, I'm going to discuss. Something like that. All of the time, we will say, I'm going to. Now, in short, you can just say, I'm going to. But in short, you can just say, I gonna. Gonna is the shorten of am going, she is going, are going, to be going, whatever. So just say gonna, I gonna. But in the real situation, in academic presentation, you would use the full form, even though gonna is also acceptable, you know, when you do the presentation. So if you are so lazy to talk about that, and if you want to be quick, you would say, I gonna I gonna something like that. It sounds like I'm going to. Now you hear from Dr. Farah that she always said, I'm going to talk about all the time. All right. And in questions number 2 in 4.2, does it mean she will talk about this idea in more detail later on the lectures or in her lecture? Yes. She will give you more detail later. If she signposts, that is a word. If she give you the signals that the next topic is going to be about, then that particular topic that she mentioned with the signposting language will be discussed or will be told or will be talked about in detail later, okay, in her talk. And we understand that because when we listen to the signpost language and we know, the next topic will come, the new thing will come, and you will hear more detail later, okay? That is it. Number three, in extract E, there is the phrase intern. Does this mean that Dr. Farah will discuss different points at the same time or one after another? All right, she said something like, in this lecture, I'm going to talk about each of these intern. When she used intern, she cannot talk about the two topics at the same time. She will talk about one after another. When one is finished, she will begin with another one. So she talked about topic 1 first and then talk about the second topic later. Okay, you understand that? So we say, I am going to talk about each of these or two topics in turn. That means you talk about one first and then you discuss the next one later. That's what we call signposting language. I want you to just put this, and I'm giving you extra point if you can also put this signpost language in your presentation or your final presentation, which account for 20 points. Okay, so please just take note on this signposting language. And my first part, I think I'm going to finish my first part right now. We will continue in the second part. Don't go anywhere. Coming back in a few seconds, okay? So taking a break in a few seconds and then you come back. Actually, I put this video all together. This is the end of my recording of part 1 and part 2 will come just now. Well, see you in part 2. Thank you for your attention, everyone. Thank you so much. See you. Bye-bye. Well, see you in a minute. Don't go anywhere.